And we're trucking along?
Testing 1 2 3, testing 1 2 3.
Good.
Good levels? Awesome. That was easy.
They just acquiring another. If you want a larger draft, buying them out. Alright, we'll go with that firm. Oh, shoot. Got to migrate that. We're actually going to stop recording in a second. Single meeting. He's smiling side of the back. Power on. Hopefully that's going to warm. I think that is great.
Testing 1 2, testing 1 2.
Okay, that's one.
Is this mic on?
Yeah, the red fan we can get turned on.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Assuming they haven't had the power killed.
Testing 1 2, testing 1 2. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you without. Yeah.
Okay.
Someone's gonna have to probably help me get over there and hit a button. I got it. No signal says, so we're plugged into HDMI, right?
Yes, sir.
Are we going to continue to use this lamp?
Oh, okay.
We should be.
I should test this earlier, especially since we had.
Hi.
I don't know how you got by without getting your speaker patch. Okay, here.
Thank you.
Do you know if the video guy's gonna be here?
I can get him here.
Because I'm not sure.
Here.
Thank you.
That's in case. But yeah,
Oh, wow. Thank you.
I was like, we've got
Maybe.
still got 3 speaker glasses. Why is that?
It says no signal. I know that.
That's really cool. Thank you very much.
Oh,
Can we go through sources?
are you sure you're plugged in all the way here?
I was, yes. I was able to move the mouse off to the other side.
Unless there's a scaler that takes it to VGA back there.
What happened to the giant button we had to hit every time?
Well, they didn't leave that door unlocked yesterday, so.
Well, if we have to, we can. Oh, you have.
They had speaker glasses.
Yes. You didn't get yours either? Nope. Okay.
Thank you.
Does anyone else? No, just come with beer. No, it doesn't come with beer. Now you're just crazy talking, man.
So, can we get to somebody? Yes.
We have beer coupons.
Sorry, should have did this earlier today. This just worked yesterday. So the first day, it had all sorts of problems.
To be fair, Saturday was one of the long days, so if it works one really long day, I ain't bad. Are you actually live streaming at the same time, or do you put them up later?
I was trying to live stream,
Cool. Excellent.
but I was also going to be putting them up later because I go in and fix some sound problem.
Awesome. Thank you.
I could continue to play with it. You might fall out. That's what I've been told.
Oh.
Does someone have a different computer just for test purposes?
You need that pen?
No, I don't. I found that. Thank you. We just want to test HDMI real quick to make sure that it's.
Yep, you got it.
I'm going to take it back out.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have HDMI? Yes.
They're coming.
Alrighty.
Fight my battle. Mine didn't automatically pick it up, and I had to go into like the low Intel graphics thing and clone it over for that.
Mine looked like it automatically picks it up because I was able to move the mouse off to the second monitor.
Okay, well that's good. Just the projector being hokey then.
Probably, hopefully.
Hold that.
How many security guys does it take to turn on a monitor?
Probably all of them.
Sounds like an electrician joke.
It's doing something. There we go.
Yes. clapper thing that worked yesterday.
Yeah, it did. Here, let's just say this.
It changed my resolution real quick.
I wonder if it has to be up there.
I didn't tell you HTML.
It seemed that there's another source because it's mirroring my
Did you put it on?
display.
Yeah. No, I think that's the killer.
You're in the other one.
And it is seemed oh god,
This is the lanyard. for that. David, do you already have your badge? Okay, here's a lanyard sticker, right here. Here's a lanyard. Well, he's already got his badge.
Yeah, right there.
Oh, wrong one. Hey, I didn't drink and I'm having problems. Remember, Tim, you're supposed to.
Yes. Okay.
Oh, okay. So here, so you have back.
Yeah, it's definitely seeing the second monitor.
Yeah, but the upper end of this cable is now the Elgato, so you're going to see something.
Fair enough. Excuse me.
Yeah, we had a lot of problems.
I can guarantee it's something in the back there.
How good are you at interpretive dance? Can you do your
Not very. Not nearly enough to convey the information that I have.
I'll plug it in so you can see.
He said midgets weren't called.
I get that signal.
Everybody's ears perk up.
There was a box back there the other day we had to dump.
Maybe just as a Hail Mary here, if we can
Well,
First day there was some, Thursday night we actually had a button we had to press back there to get things to function.
So I had,
which is the mysterious long back.
Yes.
and I had some other problems.
hey!
Is that one movie unlocks like
Hey!
And we are rolling.
All right, hello everybody. Good morning. Sorry for the technical difficulties. My name is Adam Vincent, and this is Securing the Secure Shell the Automated Way. Who am I? Primarily, I am a data scientist in my day job. I do a lot of automation, have what I would consider big data, and there's definitely bigger out there, but a lot of stuff, and the only way we can process this is through huge amounts of automation. I'm a security enthusiast. Am I an expert? Not by any stretch of the imagination, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn last night. I'm also a cryptography fan, and that's why I'm here speaking to you today. So I want to talk to you a couple of things today. First, I want to talk a little bit about SSH itself. Then I want to talk about our configuration that we're going to use with OpenSSH. I want to talk a little bit about key files because those are extremely important. Then we're actually going to look at the configuration for the OpenSSH server. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit about Ansible. First up, History of the World, Part 1. This gentleman here is Tatu Ilonen. And back in 1995, he was a researcher at the Helsinki University of Technology. And they suffered a pretty bad password sniffing attack. They had all of their usernames, passwords, data, the whole kit and caboodle going across their network backbone in clear text. So Tatu did not want his research stolen and said, hey, there's got to be a better way to do this. He started looking through a bunch of cryptography books, read through the PGP source code, and said, hey, I can do this. And in a couple months later, July of 1995, he released the very first version of SSH. So open source, it was extremely popular. And in November of 1995, he released an internet draft to the Internet Engineering Task Force that actually detailed how his protocol worked. So being, again, open source and extremely popular, because hey, who doesn't want to have their stuff encrypted across the network, got a lot of support requests for this brand new technology he created. And he said, hey, I can help you with that. And a lot of them also came with $signs attached. So he said, I can absolutely help you with that. He created the SSH Communication Security Corporation, which even today is a leading researcher in SSH. They also have their own version of SSH client and server. Has a lot of really cool stuff. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So when you have all of these new eyes on the source code, you have Linus's law play out, and you find bugs because they become shallow very, very quickly. So as people discovered more and more stuff, there were a lot of flaws that were in the source code itself, obviously, but they also found a few flaws in the actual cryptography. And to fix them, you would have to completely break backward compatibility with all current installs. So what do you do when that happens? Version 2. And in 1996, SSH Communication Security Corporation released SSH version 2. So the IETF had been monitoring this for a while and said, this is extremely important, this new technology here to encrypt things across the wire. So what we need to do is actually formalize this as a standard. So they formed the SecSH working group. And in October of 1997, that working group released the first draft. And you can find it at that link there. And we'll fast forward a little bit. January 2006, it became RFC 4251, detailing SSH2 protocol. And you can find that at that link there. So, shamelessly stole this off of Wikipedia. There are a lot of flavors of SSH. The IETF created the standard, and because it's a standard, all sorts of people can implement it. There are a whole huge variety of licenses, pretty much everything from standard open source stuff to commercial versions, and they have a huge amount of different configuration options in between them. Again, since I shamelessly stole this from Wikipedia, they also said that OpenSSH is currently the widest available, the most deployed across everything. So that is what we're going to talk about today. All right. OpenSSH is actually a suite of utilities. It's not just one. To start with, it's the SSH, which is our client. There's also SSHD, which you probably have guessed is the daemon. There's the SSH keygen utility, which lets us create strong cryptographic keys. The SSH agent, which is an in-memory key store, and we're going to talk a good bit about that here in a few minutes. There's SSH add, which is a manager for SSH agent. SCP, the secure copy program. SFTP, which is the SSH file transfer protocol. The SFTP server, obviously the server for the SSH file transfer protocol. SSH key scan and SSH key sign, which are used for host-based authentication, and we're not going to talk much about that. The first 5 are what we are going to mostly focus on. Okay, so SSH itself has a few main areas of responsibility. The primary goal was encryption across the wire, and it does this pretty much transparently to the user. It works very, very well. Second part it wants to do is message validation, and that makes sure that the encrypted bits you send across the wire are the ones that are both being received and sent. And lastly, we have user authentication. So do we actually establish the SSH connection in the first place? How do we determine if the user is allowed onto the system? So there's a new standard in cryptography, the elliptical curve, and specifically ED 25519, made by this guy, Daniel J. Bernstein. He had done a bunch of research, and the actual math for this is extremely complicated and over my head, to be perfectly honest with you. There's a lot of extremely fancy graph math involved with creating this. It works on a different set of the discrete logarithm problem. So instead of using extremely large prime numbers, we use extremely fancy graph math. Again, I'm not going to try to explain that because it's extremely complicated. If you want to learn more, check out the blog there, and you can find a lot more about that. The important thing is that we can use this without having to know all the technical details. Thank you, technology. And what we're going to do is create some private keys, public-private key pairs specifically, using this ED25519 algorithm. So this was actually added in OpenSSH version 6.5, which was released back in January of 2014. So you at least need that version or newer to be able to use this particular functionality. So if we're going to go generate keys, what are we going to use? SSH keygen. So very simple command line interface to create these keys. The -T option gives you, there's actually a huge number of things it allows, but we're going to specifically use the ED25519. And we're also going to use the -A flag. And the -A flag is a really interesting option. So it doesn't actually add security to the key itself. What it does is prevent or help prevent brute force attacks against the key. What it will do is iterate over the value that you put in as the password a number of times. So it imposes a cost because it will hash the password first and then hash that value and then hash that value and on and on and on until that number of times. So anyone who wants to get into and try to crack the key has to hash that many times. It's a bit of a soft cost. You know, technology is always improving. We're never going to have less processing power than we do right now, but it makes it harder for people to brute force into the keys. As a bit of a benchmark for that, using a 1,000 round iteration, I've got a couple of generations old Core i7 in my desktop at home, and it will do that in about 7 seconds. And yeah, that means every single time that I use the key, it costs me 7 seconds. But that also means that anyone who wants to brute force that has to spend 7 seconds per guess, give or take a little bit for processing power and whatnot. So it dramatically reduces, or sorry, dramatically increases the amount of time it takes for brute force attacks. So this is the standard output for SSH keygen. By default, it saves it in the .sh/id_ed25519. Both the private key gets saved there and the public key gets saved as that .pub. Choose a strong password for this. It's extremely, extremely important to choose a strong password. Again, according to Wikipedia, if you want a really good secure password, you want at least 20 random ASCII characters. And when I say random, I don't mean your dog's name and your wife's maiden name and your birthday. Truly randomly generated 20 characters. And what that will do is create bits of entropy that we need to use for security. So the ED25519 standard is considered to have 128 bits of security. And what that means, we'll talk about in just a couple minutes. But okay, let's see. So again, I said OpenSSH 6.5 was the first version that the elliptic curve stuff was implemented. There are a lot of older clients running around in the wild, and sometimes you simply don't have an option but to use some of the older stuff. So if you need to use older things, you can still generate RSA keys, and I would recommend at least a 4096-bit key. These, again, are different bits. These are like actual bits on the hard drive length as opposed to the bits of entropy, which, again, we're going to talk about here in just a minute. Also, another fun little option, -O. There's a new key format that OpenSSH uses. It uses it specifically with the elliptic curve, and again, I believe it was OpenSSH 6.5 that implemented that as well. That will save these as a SHA-256 version. So that way it's even harder to actually crack and break into these. So by default, if you want it on the older algorithms, you have to tell it, hey, go ahead and use this new thing. So, okay. I want to diverge for a minute into a little bit of crazy cryptography. Anybody spend any time in the locked port room across the hall? Anybody? Nobody at all? All right. Well, standard locks, you've got a few pins, average 4 to 6 pins, and you have to set those pins, and if you're like pretty good at it, you can kind of feel when the pin's set on the tumbler. So that takes, what, a couple of minutes, plus, you get a little bit of feel, maybe a little bit faster if you're really good at it. So what if we increase the number of pins? 4 to 6 doesn't take that long, but what if we increased it to 10 pins? What if we increased it 20, 50? You can imagine that would get pretty ridiculous to use, number one, because the key would become increasingly larger. And it would also be increasingly harder to pick because you'd have to set all of these bits. So what if we go up to 128 pins? Well, again, we have this gigantic imaginary key that you'd have to be some sort of a giant to hold and use. So let's reimagine our key as a couple of chessboards full of switches. So unfortunately, with these, we lose the ability to feel when the pins get set. So how long do you think it would take to figure out, with absolutely no feel and no information, the correct order of these switches that would open the magic treasure chest full of gold and jewels and bitcoins and everything else that you've ever wanted? A really long time. Really, really long time. So what this generates is a set of combinations that is 2 to the 128th power. That is a comically large number, specifically 3.4 times 10 to the 38th power. Comically large. So one of my favorite cryptography statistics, Bruce Schneier, in his book Applied Cryptography, did a little bit of math on this, and using the best understanding of physics that we have on completely ideal circumstances. If you could capture every bit of energy that our sun puts out for 32 years, some gigantic Dyson sphere, and you were then able to channel all of that energy perfectly into some magic computer that could increment a counter, with all of that energy, you could increment a single counter 187-bit counter to its maximum value. That's a stupidly large amount of energy, a stupidly large amount of time. Number one, we're not going to channel the entire energy of our sun into a magic computer, and we're not going to use that computer to then try to crack cryptography. We're just not going to do it because it's silly. Another interesting number he created, if you could somehow do that in a gigantic giant Dyson sphere around a supernova, you could, again, use all of that energy to increment a 219-bit counter, and again, insanely large numbers. So even if you have those numbers, all you've done is actually increment through their values. You've not done any useful math with them whatsoever. You've literally just made them one bigger. So if we're applying this back to the treasure chest and opening keys and locks, if we want to apply energy to a problem, how much energy is it going to take to actually break this 128 option thing? For our purposes, pretty much infinity. It's close enough to be infinity that we'll call it infinity. It's extremely, extremely hard. So on a 128-bit security, 128 bits of security, you're pretty much guaranteed, again, other than weird side channel attacks and some other stuff like that, that key is going to outlive you. That no one is going to break it in your lifetime, your children's lifetimes, their children's lifetimes, down through your generations. If you go up to a 256-bit of entropy key, then, sorry, bits of security key, you're talking like heat death end of the universe amounts of energy that it would take to actually crack the thing. So how paranoid are you? Do you really need a 256-bit key? Maybe. I don't know. So, back on track a little bit. We have generated our key. So we're going to actually go outside of OpenSSH for a second. SSH copy ID is one of the most useful utilities of all time. What it'll do is log into a server and put your public key into that user's authorized key file. Anybody who was playing CTF the other day, the authorized keys are a great way of getting between servers. But if you're using them without a password, it makes a serious, serious security hole that people can just hop between boxes for. So make sure when you do this that the key, the private key attached to that public key, has a strong password. It's really, really important. So if you, for some reason, do not have SSH copy ID, that's actually really the set of steps that it does. It will copy using SSH the key it will SCP the file up to the server. It will then concatenate the key to the authorized key file and then remove the actual file that it uploaded. All right, so we've got all of these keys. We spent a huge amount of time on these keys. What can we actually do with it? So, slight detour again. Like I said, my really long 1,000-round iteration key takes me 7 seconds to use. And that's really, really annoying. And especially if you got that, you still have to type in a 20-character password, which is also really, really annoying if you're bouncing between boxes pretty quick. So what we can do, and this is the first bit of magic I'd like to show you, we're going to use the SSH agent. And I said earlier it's an in-memory key store, and that's pretty much true. What it does is maintains a copy of your unlocked private keys in memory to then allow SSH, SCP, and other SSH utilities to use that key. Specifically, it sets two environment variables, the SSH agent ID and SSH auth sock, that the other utilities know how to use. The auth sock is actually a file. It's one of the Linux special files on the disk, so it allows inter-process communication stuff. Pretty fancy. However, sometimes the SSH agent is not up by default. If you need to run the SSH agent, what it will do actually is fork itself into the background as soon as you run it. But with that, it's not allowed to set the environment variables in the current shell. So it has this nice option of -s, which will echo the born shell variables or born shell commands that it needs to run, and eval we can do to actually run those commands, exporting the environment variables and then specifically telling the user, hey, I've started up with this process ID. One more interesting option I want to point out is the -t, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later. That's a security option, and it says that we need to expire keys in 7 days. Again, according to your own personal paranoia level, security requirements and everything else, increase that up and down, but good default. And then SSH add -l will show you which keys are in the agent. However, if we have just started up the agent, we get this handy little message, the agent has no identities. That sounds familiar. Wait a minute. Okay, so let's actually add some IDs to our agent. Fairly simple, again, command line option, SSH add, and we're seeing this -t flag again. If we have no units specified, it's in seconds. And then we have to specifically tell it which one of the keys that we want to add into the agent. The -T option is actually extremely configurable. You don't have to give it numbers in seconds because that gets ridiculous. Give it in minutes. You can do some mixed case stuff like 1 day, 12 hours, which equivalent to 36 hours and other equivalencies down the chain. But what that will do is prompt you for your private key password. And remember, extremely important, don't mistype that password because it will cost you that amount of time every single time you mistype it. So once it's loaded into the SSH agent, if for some reason you don't ever touch it again in 600 seconds, 10 minutes, whatever, then that key will be purged from memory. So really, really useful if you need to just load up an extremely secure key for a short amount of time to do single task type stuff. If you're looking at some less secure thing that you're just using a lot, increase the time span again, what your security requirements are, adjust up and down. Once it's actually in, like I said, you can delete it immediately using the lowercase d flag, or you can go nuclear and delete every key in the entire agent with the capital D. So one other nice little magic trick the SSH agent has is locking and unlocking. So let's say you've got one of these really super secure keys locked into memory. It has a 64-character password. It's got forever, 1,000 million rounds, whatever. Well, let's say you have to step away from your box. Do you really want to have to wait 5 minutes for the key to unlock after typing 64-character password and hoping you didn't mistype that and everything else? Not really. That's a hassle. So what the SSH agent has is lock and unlock. When the agent is locked, it simply will not service any requests. Important security note. When it's locked, the keys are not re-encrypted. They are still in memory. They are still available in memory. So if someone has super user type access and can scrape memory, those keys are still there. But you can then unlock the agent with the capital X option. Whew. All right, let's actually talk about some configuration. There are a lot of very basic options we're going to go through first. And then we're going to go into a little bit more of the crazy cryptography again. All right, Protocol 2. So if you remember back into our history lesson, in 1996, they said, hey, this old version's broken. We should probably stop using it. So what we're going to do is say, we will only accept the second protocol. We don't want to use the first one. It's been broken since before the millennium. Don't do it. Permit root login. So when you have a server, you don't want someone coming in as a super user. Almost never. It's a very bad idea. You don't want users doing it. You really don't want attackers doing it. So just straight up disable it. Let users have standard privilege escalation through other mechanisms. Don't let them come in as the super user. Let's see. There is actually, I will make a caveat to that. There is one special exception where this is okay. Instead of the configuration option of no, there is forced commands only. You can set up individual keys to have access to a root account. So let's say you need to run a backup of some sort, and you know that you have to have root permissions to run this backup. It needs to run with super level access across. You can set up a key to then log into the box, and when that key logs into the box, the only thing it's allowed to do, and literally nothing else happens, is that command gets run. So you can set up, backup.sh to that private key or that public key, and when that public key gets in, then you have a backup kicked off. In general, unless you have an extremely, extremely good reason to do that sort of thing, just don't allow root login. It's a very, very bad idea. We want to enable public key authentication because that's a really, really good idea. Instead of having passwords, which again can be brute forced eventually, if we use the public key, it takes a near infinity amount to brute force these public keys. So let's use those because it's really, really secure. 1 second. A lot of stuff on this slide. Okay, and then obviously next, once we have public key authentication enabled, we want to disable password authentication. There's no reason once you have keys set up that you need to be logging into these servers with passwords. You need to make extremely, extremely sure that the keys are set up before you actually do this, because you can and will lock yourself out of the box. And by you, I mean me, because I've done that multiple times. It's important, don't do it. Learn from my mistakes. Host-based authentication, no. You can, by default, trust entire hosts, trust users coming from those hosts. If you've got extremely, extremely good control over all of that, then maybe there's a case for it. But in general, public key authentication is what you want to use for SSH. Login grace time. By default, this is actually 120 seconds. And what it will do is sit there and hold open a connection while a user is trying to log in. If a user hasn't logged in 120 seconds, it just automatically closes the connection. So this is a little bit of a kind of personal preference, but there's really no reason to hold open the connection that long for things that you know to be like trustworthy. This also kind of leaves you open to a little bit of DDoS stuff, and you just don't want that. Max auth tries. The configuration option of 3. The default is actually 6 in OpenSSH. What this does is limit the number of times a user can attempt a login per connection attempt. So you SSH to host, and then you type your password in, and you see it fail. Well, okay, you try it again, and okay, it fails again. Third time fails, it'll actually disconnect you. So since we are not going to use passwords, we are going to reduce this dramatically from 6 to 3. The agent can actually be configured to, the hosts can be configured to, one more time, sorry. The clients can be configured to specifically tell each individual host which key it wants to use. However, if I know anything about users, we get lazy about configuration. So what we'll do is we will just load up a couple of keys into the agent, and the agent does its best. It tries everything it can to think of, and what that means is guessing which key to use. So 3 allows users like me to be a little bit lazy with configuration, but still be able to get in with the public keys. So the other interesting thing about the max auth tries is that it has a follow-on effect of any attempt over half of that value gets logged if it fails. So essentially for that, a user gets 1 try that is free, all right, whatever. But on the second and third ones, because they are over half of the 1.5, 2 to 3, it gets logged and says, hey, someone's doing something they probably shouldn't be doing over here. Max sessions. So SSH by default forks off child processes. SSHD forks off child processes to handle the individual connections. Actually, we were in Capture the Flag yesterday hitting this quite a bit because our friend over there was brute forcing all of the passwords. So in the middle of this, we were running out of SSH connections. I believe the default for this value is 10, but on systems that that are going to be much smaller users, give yourself a little bit of leeway to not get locked out, but 5 is still a pretty comfortable margin of error. All right, what you can actually do is specify host keys. When the computer first creates, or when the SSHD first creates a login, it will generate keys for the host. And one of the nice things about SSH is that it specifically says, this is the key I identify myself with. So you can find out if someone has hijacked in the middle of your connection. You try to connect, and it says, hey, this key is, this host is presenting with this key, do you trust it? And you always get the yes or no prompt. Sometimes you say yes, sometimes you say no. You always say yes. But theoretically, if you have a well-controlled host base, you can specifically list out all of your host's public keys, so you can then say, oh, this key actually matches that host, I actually trust it. And those will go into your known hosts file in your individual user accounts. Not talking about that right now, but what we can do is actually generate much stronger host keys. By default, it uses some kind of silly options. So we will go ahead and generate a brand new one for the hosts that we're on if we would like to. However, the important thing is that the host keys have to not have passwords. So SSHD needs to have the private key to be able to then use the public key as well for both sides of that. So if you want to generate the elliptic curve key, that command. If you would like to generate an RSA key for the host, that command. Again, if you don't have a bunch of old clients, don't enable the RSA. Allow groups. There are a couple of different options around this. There's allow groups, allow users. I think there's actually an allow hosts as well. What you can do is specifically lock down which users are allowed to connect in. It goes back to our user authentication piece. Groups is a lot more flexible. Instead of having to restart the SSH daemon every time that you want to change which users are allowed into your system, what you can do is allow a group of users, and then all of the users in that group, you can add whatever at any time, and SSH says, oh, okay, this person's okay to come into my server. Okay, that was a lot, but those are a lot of the very basic stuff. Now we're going to talk about a little bit of crazy cryptography again. Follow with me. I apologize. It'll be over soon. The key exchange algorithms. There are quite a few of these. The SSH protocol itself has a list of available options for this. However, the IETF realized that eventually we would need more of them. So what we have is the ability to define brand new ones using the syntax you see here that says @ and then an identifying URL. So specifically what we want to enable is curve 25519. And what this is an elliptic curve version of the Diffie-Hellman algorithm. So let's see. If you have an extremely recent set of clients, this will work out for you just fine. However, if you are having a bunch of old clients that just straight up can't update for whatever reason, you can enable also the Diffie-Hellman group exchange, and that uses the standard set of Diffie-Hellman algorithms. Now, if you enable the Diffie-Hellman specifically without the elliptic curve, you need to go one step further. There is a set of I just lost the word. A set of prime numbers, a prime number group inside of this file here, etc SSH moduli. And by default, a lot of these are pretty low strength. You have 1024-bit prime numbers, you have 2048-bit prime numbers. So, and actually for some compatibility, there's even less than 1024. You don't want to use extremely small prime numbers because, again, we have enough processing power to actually break some of those. What we're going to do is actually generate our own. Going back to our friend SSH keygen, we will generate a set of possible prime numbers that might be prime numbers. And we're going to specifically tell it to use only 4096 bits for the prime numbers. This doesn't take that long, but it's not also very quick. About half hour usually, give or take. And it'll generate, again, a pretty long list of options. However, not all of the options that it generates are actually prime numbers. So that's where we're going to go to our friend SSH keygen again and say, hey, now that we have all these options, will you test them and make sure that we're actually using prime numbers, because it's really, really important. So when you get up to prime numbers in this large of a bit range, it's extremely hard and extremely time consuming to actually fully test for the thing being entirely a prime number. However, there is an algorithm which lets us get extremely high probability. I should have written down that algorithm name, but the SSH keygen implements it, and it will run each number through this algorithm 100 times based on a set of, it starts at some random number, and then based on the output of that, checks it again and again and again. And after 100 rounds, you have 99.5 or 69% probability that this number is actually a prime number. So it's very, very good as a limit test. You obviously don't want to go through and test every single number up to that number divisible because it'll take forever. Okay. So yeah, it'll output to the moduli.all there with the -f option. And what you'll want to do then is move the safe options that you found into the actual moduli file. So this, again, it comes with every distro you find. It's set up by default, which also makes the numbers in there extremely valuable targets, because if you actually can crack one of them, everyone using them you can spy on. So generate your own. This will take time. It's a lengthy process. You're doing a huge amount of math. I don't actually have a benchmark number for you, but it will take you not very, it won't take days, but it won't be quick. So kind of in the middle, let it run off to the background. If you want, generate a bunch of these beforehand and then just copy them over to the new servers as you get them. Okay, so key exchange algorithms, that specifically is the negotiation for the shared secret that we're going to use to further communicate back and forth. Okay. Once we have the shared secret, what we want to use is an actual symmetric cipher. We will plug in the shared secret to this. There are a few pretty good options. The Cha-Cha 20 is based on Salsa 20, and it is using a Poly 1305 hash algorithm. It's extremely secure and uses elliptic curve cryptography again, so that's what we would like to use as a symmetric cipher. If you need to have older clients again, we still want to use extremely high bits for the actual ciphers. Again, 128 if you're slightly less paranoid, but again, processing power is only going to get more plentiful and cheaper, so if you have the option, go ahead and use the strongest stuff you can get a hold of. So those three in that order. MACs, message authentication codes. So this is the validation step. Each time that you have this encrypted set of bits, you want to say, here's a hash basically of what bits that I'm sending you and attach that to the message. There are a bunch of algorithms for this, and a lot of them use pretty high number of bits, as you can see there. ETM is specifically encrypt then MAC. So what you're doing is taking the hash of the encrypted set of information instead of the base information unencrypted. Theoretically, it'd be really, really hard to brute force the actual contents from that MAC if it's not encrypted first. But if you were able to, or specifically doing the MAC against the encryption, all they would get back from brute forcing that hash would be the encrypted set of bits. So again, pretty much useless to them. Okay, so that was a lot of stuff. That was the actual server configuration itself. It lives in /etc/ssh/sshd_config. So there are ways to configure the clients as well. And pretty much everything I just said there that is not explicitly for a server, number of login attempts and stuff like that, that stuff can also be configured on the client side, so you can make the client itself more secure. Again, if you are connecting to a more permissibly configured SSH server, you can still have the client choose to use the strongest stuff again, assuming that the server supports it. It has a cascading permission set, which is really nice. There's a system level that is living in etc ssh ssh config. After that, there are options that you can set in the users.ssh folder in the config file. And finally, when you actually run SSH, you can get command line options to alter and change around pretty much any of that stuff on the fly. The server configurations take effect unless the user's configuration changes it, and the user's configuration takes effect unless the command line changes it. Pretty much standard cascading permissions. The really nice thing about the client is that you can specify different options per host. OpenSSH specifically has a really nice feature, or possibly not nice feature depending on how you look at it. The very first value that matches is what gets set, and it will not get overridden in this cascading permission set. So you don't want to completely lock down everything from the system level of SSH config. You want to allow some configuration options there. Okay, so we've gone through a whole lot of configuration. Now we want to automate it, because that was a lot. So we're going to talk a little bit about Ansible. Ansible is an automation framework that runs over SSH. It's Python-based, written by a fellow by the name of Michael DeHaan. Ansible, the name itself, comes from an old book called Rocannon's World in 1966. It was also in Ender's Game and a bunch of other pretty famous sci-fi stuff. Ansible itself, again, uses SSH and is configured in YAML, the yet another markup language. The really nice advantage to using YAML and Python together is the actual syntax is very, very similar, down to even the spacing being important. Okay, so the Ansible hosts file. To actually tell Ansible what servers to operate on, they have a host file. You can set it up in standard INI format where you have a group name and then a set of options. It has a very flexible syntax. You can use patterns, you can use ranges, you can do all sorts of fancy stuff, but you can configure a static hosts file. Luckily, you do not have to use a static hosts file. If you have gigantic enterprise sets of servers, everything else, there are a number of very common inventory plugins you can use with Ansible. Amazon actually released one for EC2, so you can give it your authentication information and run ec2.py, and it will generate this file against your current configuration out on AWS. There are plugins for LDAP, Active Directory, all sorts of different things. Or again, static if you need that. So yeah. Okay, so this is really the entire code for it. First, we use a specific keyword called hosts, and that tells this particular playbook which ones to actually set up. Well, if we're configuring our security, let's run it against all the things. One other important thing, YAML, there are 3 dashes at the top there. That is the start of a YAML file. So it doesn't, yeah, it's not a mistake. It's actually supposed to be there. Become is it basically tells the playbook to use super level access. By default, what that will use is sudo. When you get into the box, whatever user you've authenticated as runs that. There's other options you can configure to change that to other methods, but this works just fine. So, tasks. Inside of the playbook, we need to basically do 2 things. What we want to do is copy our nice SSH config file that we've set up, now that it has all the nice secured permissions, out onto the server. So we tell the copy module to get the source of local directory resources, SSH deconfig, and put it in the destination there on whatever server that we're operating on. Ansible will operate iteratively over the hosts, and there's configuration options for like X number at a time and some other fancy stuff. but this will do it on each one of the servers. The last option there, validate, is extremely important too. So we are managing SSH over SSH. What we don't want to do is lock ourselves out. That's a terrible time. Again, learn from my mistakes. So what we can do when we copy a file is have a utility on the host itself validate that information. And specifically, the SSH daemon has a -t flag that you can give it that will have it validate the current configuration. That information and all of the return values from this particular execution of copy, we register into copy_result. So what we want to do then, once we've got the actual configuration out there, is tell SSH, the SSH daemon, to start using it. However, like I said, we want to make sure that the file we put out there is valid and is not going to just lock us out of the box. So we use this magic here when copy_result.checksum, when the copy places the file out there, it will take a SHA-1 sum of that file and put it into the variable checksum. So since we know exactly what the checksum should be on our side, because it's a static file on our side, we take that checksum, we say, there it is in there, test that against what the checksum is from the server. If they match, then we need to tell the SSH daemon to reread the configuration file. Luckily, there is a nice convenient way of doing that without actually fully restarting it and killing everything. If you send the SSH daemon the hup signal, then it will reread the configuration and do the standard forking stuff around to have new connections start using that configuration. Also, I highly recommend you have logged in to this box with, at least until you're sure that this works, with some user with like sudo access or some other root permissions, because you will invariably mess it up once or twice, and then you'll have to completely reimage the box, and it's a terrible, terrible time. Okay, so pretty short, no big deal. To actually run this, real simple again. We run the command ansible-playbook on the setup.ssh.yaml file that we created, and we give it the -k option, which tells it to prompt for the administrator level access. Anytime we use the sudo, we don't want to hard code that password into the file because, again, terrible, terrible security. So, hey, ask me when you start running a thing, and I'll give it to you. Whew. All right, lot of resources. Specifically, a lot of the cryptography and stuff came from this top site. It's actually what gave me the inspiration for the talk many, many moons ago. The guy looked at the NSA leaks and said, hey, if the NSA is spying on everything, we probably should be a little more secure, and went back through and configured the SSH to pretty similar to what I have. I've actually done a little bit more restrictive stuff than he did, but there's that. The actual snail book, the SSH Definitive Guide, read through that. It's also incredibly informative. There are an enormous amount of configuration options you can give to SSH, even past what I've put up here. Same thing with the client, just a wealth of good information in that. The crypto's a little outdated because I believe the second edition was published in 2006, but the actual options haven't changed that much. I will put that somewhere. I'm not entirely sure where. I'll get with Adrian and have him publish it up there. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Any questions? All right. Thank you. Two special acknowledgements. First, thank you to my wife because she put up with me while I was doing all of that. I get a little insufferable when I'm geeking out about technology, and I've been doing that for weeks now. So thank you for that. And also the pretty stuff from this, that was my wife's doing, so no credit for that. Second, thanks to my company for actually sending me agile5technologies.com. If you want to have any kind of work in North Central West Virginia, hit us up. And thanks a lot, guys.
Stop recording.
That information and all of the return values from copy will be registered to copy actual result. So what we want to do then, once we've got the actual I was better at it, but I realize I am.
I've never done this, man. How do I get in
Switch
there?
this on. Here, hold it. Just right about that level of the tide that we show up on the.
Okay.
If we were on film, we'd do it on the button underneath the tide. We just stick it in your pocket and you're good to go.
All right. Thank you.
You'll loop one?
Yes, I am.
Is Bitcoin actually using a ticker at this point? I know some of the altcoins do.
It has at the beginning for key generation. So.
You know the video? Got an HDMI port out?
I do.
Just sit there and take the mic them up and sit down.
Yeah.
Should have. There you go.
I'll figure it out.
Good.
Get my first rodeo.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. It's going to be like that. Let's restart here.
Okay, so you're plugged in?
Yeah. Can you hear me on there? Am I coming through over there?
Actually, I was trying to, not seeing you.
Oh yeah. I'm getting it there. Just give me a second.
No signal.
I'm not plugged in yet. I got to restart real quick. The latest kernel destroyed my device.
What is that, lead? What's the bottom one? Oh, so that's a good dot.
Would have been so much better. Toss the coins on the table.
Okay. Well, all right. Can anyone hear me? Do I need to speak into the mic? Are we at good volume here? Okay. So, my presentation is Bitcoin from zero to I get it. That's what I'm hoping to accomplish today, is that people who don't know about Bitcoin or maybe seen it once or twice can go from just a basic understanding they have to understanding all the parts that go into it and being able to intelligently speak on it if anyone were asking about it. I'd like to thank SecureWV for having me here today, for accepting my paper, and 304 Geeks for hosting it. I've had fun the little bit I was here on Friday to pick up my badge. So we'll get started here. So this is what we're talking about. We're talking about Bitcoin. Now, what is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency. It is a currency that uses cryptography to verify the transfer and its transactions. It's digital, and it is hosted on a decentralized database called the blockchain. The blockchain can be used for many other things, but it was first introduced with Bitcoin to keep track of the transactions and the transference of Bitcoin from users to each other. So let's start from the beginning. When it comes to some principles about Bitcoin itself, there are 21 million coins themselves, and they are divisible. We'll go over how far they go down here in a second. No censorship. If you have a valid transaction, the idea is if you follow all the rules on the network, your transaction will go through, will be accepted, and you can interact as long as you follow the rules. That would be valid transactions cannot be prevented from being confirmed. Open source. The original Bitcoin implementation has been open source from the beginning. Many other coins have been re-implemented as closed, but then later became open source because they realized when they find a bug, it's better to have more eyes looking at it than fewer. Having something closed source and secure is basically keeping the key underneath the doormat. And that's been something part of Bitcoin from the beginning. Permissionless. No one can just say you're not allowed to use it. No arbitrary gatekeepers. If you can download the software, if you can connect to the internet, and you're not behind a firewall, no one on the network is going to keep someone from using it. As long as you follow the rules, nothing will keep you from doing it. And that kind of goes into how it needs to be pseudonymous. Excuse me. No ID, no verification. If you follow the rules, you can use it. Now, people can block your IP address if you're known to be a malicious user or what have you, but the network protocol suggests that there's no bias towards anybody for any reason at all. That hasn't been at least proven by malicious use or what have you. Fungibility. Every Bitcoin is the same in terms of how it is transmitted on the network. Again, people can choose not to accept it from certain people, but the protocol itself is neutral to all coins and transactions. And irreversible transactions. There are no remittances, there are no chargebacks. If you send Bitcoin to somebody, the way you get it back is by having them send that back. Now, these are some things I want you to keep in mind during the whole presentation, because they'll come up, and you'll see how the design, relates to these, and how these sort of, made the Bitcoin network and protocol work. So we have our units here. Each Bitcoin can be reduced down to 1/100 millionth. That's a Satoshi named after the guy who invented it, Satoshi Nakamoto, which isn't his real name, obviously. But of course, if you have, these are what they're referred to as. You have Bitcoins and smaller transactions, and of course, if Bitcoin is at $100, that's how much each piece will be worth. Now, notice how that's a fraction of a cent. That's by design. That way you can have very precise transaction amounts and sending value over the internet. Now, Bitcoin's at about 730, 20, depending on where you look. So adjust it for those, and you'll see how much Bitcoin is in those different denominations. Now, when Bitcoin is sent, it has to have double entry bookkeeping. Who it's sent from and who it's sent to need to be kept track of, because it's secured using cryptography and keys, which I'll show you in a second. And you have the inputs, you have the outputs, and the difference between them is a fee to use the network. That way, everyone who runs it, everyone who mines, everyone who interacts with the network has a reason to send to transmit your transaction. So the inputs and the outputs, the difference is the transaction fee, which will go to, we have our common transaction where someone has some coins and they send it to somebody. But if you'll notice, when someone has inputs, They are whole numbers there. And when they're sent over, those aren't the same. Those don't line up. It's because each transaction, each piece of Bitcoin is like a denomination. Like you have $100, you break it to send to more addresses, like we have here. Someone wants to send somebody some Bitcoin, they take a transaction they have and they split it into who it's being sent to and some change back to themselves, usually the same address that sent it. Okay? And here's something I want you to look at. We have the transactions, and what we're having on the blockchain is a chain of ownership using public and private keys. So you have the private key to sign over transactions. You have parts of that transaction to the next person, to someone's public key. And I'll go over this again as we learn more about it. So what we're trying to put together here on the blockchain of Bitcoin is they move from person to person. It's the same Bitcoins, and you can have a chain of transactions to show who owns it. Now, let's talk about privacy. In normal banking and financial tools, you have everything sort of goes on the back end in the background, and the public doesn't know much about it unless they are the owner of an account or annuity or something. Bitcoin's a little bit different because every transaction is out there. It's all out there. Your identity is kept secret using using cryptography and your private key, but all transactions are public. The entire blockchain can be mined, data mined, verified, looked at, and into perpetuity as long as the network's up. So that's part of the openness that you can't block somebody from using it, because anyone can verify. Anyone can say this is legitimate or it's not for transactions. So what we have here, we have some Bitcoin addresses. These are basically the public keys that you give to someone and they send you some money, Bitcoin. And you'll notice they all begin with a 1, they're all about the same length, they're a jumble of letters and numbers. Of course, those are generated using cryptographic functions, and they're encoded into something called base 58. It's a human-readable encoding with a limited alphabet for addresses and sometimes for keys. Yes, the alphabet, the order it's in, it may look familiar to some of you because it's basically base 64 without these here. That way it's human-readable. There's no ambiguity. Give her some special characters, because sometimes when you copy and paste things, when you click it twice, it'll stop at special characters. So you double-click it when you copy and paste it. It's all alphanumeric, and just about every editor or browser will not stop and cut it off. So now, because everyone can get access to the blockchain and just download it, all 60 gigs of it, ownership of Bitcoin isn't exactly the best way to think about it all the time. Control is a better way to do it, because if you have the private key to an address that holds the Bitcoin, you can control it. Let's see. I'm glad the last person talked about cryptography a little bit, so it's all in your brains here, but we've all seen this. We've all seen public and private keys for your emails and things like that. You have a private key. You run it through elliptic curve cryptography to become the public key, and there's a little more that gets added to it for it to become the actual Bitcoin address that's valid on the network. Now let's look at this again. We have public keys and private keys that interact with the transactions to sign over value to other people. And the hashes are there to verify it, to verify that this actually happened. It's a combination of these keys. That way, if someone says, this is mine, well, you have to provide the public key and your private key to verify that. So what we're still creating here is signed chains of ownership for Bitcoin. So let's start with an example that's out front so we can all look at how it starts. Let's take a string, any old string, okay? And it becomes a private key for elliptic curve cryptography. And you run it through the functions, and you get your public key. If you are a little more familiar with it, the top part is the x and the y coordinates of the formula. If you're actually familiar with how elliptic cryptography works, and you run it through another process to go from your public key to the actual Bitcoin address. You run it through SHA-256, RIPMD 160, and it gives you a hash of your public key. And then you do some encoding, and it gives you the actual address. So let's go through those parts. We have our public key, we run it through the hash functions, and we're there with the one at the bottom. Now, how that actually turns into a public key is pretty simple. So if you have that and you want to convert it to base 58 and actually have it be a valid public key, you have to run it through some more here. So you have your, there's your pay public key. You add the version because there is a test net for Bitcoin. You want to be on the real, actual network. You add some checksums at the end. You encode it, and there you have your actual Bitcoin address. And there's all that. You take some bytes off the end of there, add it to, and encode it, and you have a perfectly valid Bitcoin address. Now, when you have your addresses, you store them in a program called a wallet. You have a set of public keys and private keys in your wallet. And if you use the method I did, except for you use something random, you'll have a bunch of random keys from different public, from different private keys in a wallet. A wallet can be just it can be just a text file on your desktop, or it can be a very sophisticated piece of software, that keeps track of everything. Like this. You can have, instead of just one seed, a string like the one I put, you can have a master, a seed that becomes the key, and you can iterate over it and create more keys. So if you had one phrase you can remember, a random phrase about 10-15 words, you can go anywhere in the world that has the internet access, not North Korea basically, and get access to the blockchain and your Bitcoin. If Bitcoin was ever made illegal in a place, China, I'll say it, and someone can remember 10 words, they can put it all somewhere, leave the country, and get access to it. I guess that emphasizes how, ownership isn't the right way to think of it. It's control. So, and there's actually a wallet called Mycelium that does that for you. Your 12-word mnemonic becomes your master key. You have it all there, and it just starts generating them. So really all it holds on to is your master key, and it just runs it through the process each time to give you all your Bitcoin addresses. And of course, who here uses a smart card at work or some kind of hardware-based cryptography? Yeah. So if you had that and you never wrote it anywhere, you put that in your computer, that could be the seed, the certificate, the private certificate on it. And that's what we have here. I do have one of those, actually a Bitcoin wallet that goes through Mycelium and does this. Let's go back to our example here. What's wrong here? What's not good here? What's insecure here? Somebody. I want to answer somebody. Anybody. Dictionary words? Yes. Both dictionary words and, anyone who recognizes that song could know that even the most awful script kiddie dictionary attack could break that and generate that. But if you want to have security like you do with all passwords, you either use something that's cryptographically secure, source of randomness, and because the blockchain can be downloaded by anybody, you don't have to send a query to make sure it's correct. You can just keep running addresses all day, and there's in fact even a website that finds all examples like this that have been put in presentations and books and things and puts them out there to make sure that no one actually tries to use them. So that's how you get your keys, and that's how you get ownership of Bitcoin once it's on the blockchain. Again here, I hope this makes a little more sense now that with your private key and other people's public keys, you send Bitcoin from one person to the next, and as you see, it starts connecting. It's all connected. It's a chain. Actually, if you send it to enough people, it starts looking like a large tree. So we have our transactions, and it goes from person to person. We've got our nice standard names, Alice and Bob. And we have our inputs and outputs. And we'll look at the common transactions to have change in things, but it can be a little bit different sometimes because the transaction fees on the network are based on how much space you put into a block, how many transactions you use in bytes or kilobytes. So if you have a lot of Bitcoin across a bunch of different addresses, you can create a transaction to put it either all into one to aggregate it or to send it to many people. And that will reduce the amount of data being sent to the blockchain and your transaction fees. So let's look here. We've got a transaction. The output of that first transaction goes to Joe, and then he signs it, and it goes to Alice with the implied transaction fee there. And if you see, the transaction, the second one, is the one from the first one, the output from that first one. And it goes to the next person, and on to the next person. So each splitting of Bitcoin is part of a transaction. The inputs from one transaction become the outputs from another one, and they keep splitting out unless they're aggregated. And here it is on the actual blockchain. If you use a block explorer, you can see that they are actually here. And you've got your output to those addresses. It can show you the fees, since it's obvious that person sent it from their address to their own address. That's obviously a change transaction. And you can see where the fees are and the estimated Bitcoin transacted here. Now there's one type of transaction that I think really is the key to everyone's understanding when it comes to how Bitcoin is generated. When Bitcoin is generated, it's mined, and people do the work to generate it, they put into the blockchain a transaction to themselves or to whoever. They probably want to put it to themselves so they can get credit for it. But what you have is in every time someone solves a block and adds something to the blockchain, there is a transaction, the very first one, to themselves. That is the reward for actually propping up the network. And if you go back to our transaction fees here, the difference between those transactions is the transaction fee, and that is added to our transaction, which is called the coin-based transaction. So after a while, once Bitcoin, less is being made every 10 minutes, fees for transactions will be the majority of what's being sent. In fact, once no more Bitcoin is being generated, that will be all that's being generated. So mining isn't dead yet, but I'll let you be the judge as to whether or not you want to jump into it. So we've talked a lot about chaining of transactions and the flow of money from people to one another. And this is what we can think of as the blockchain. You have blocks, they have transactions in them, they have their hashes, they verify them, and they point to each other. Now, in there you see something called proof of work. Now that's an algorithm I'm going to describe here in a second that basically it tells everyone, I've done the work, I'm worthy of that 50 Bitcoin for doing this. But let's look at these blocks to start with. They have some details in them, and the size and the bytes there. You have the size of the blocks, the header, the transactions that are contained within them. And you have the header itself, which has a lot of pertinent information. And this is very important when it comes to mining. You have the version, the previous block hash that points back to it. The Merkle root, which is basically a cryptographic, it's a tree of all the transactions. The timestamp, pretty obvious. And two things at the bottom, the difficulty target and the nonce. I'll explain those in a second, but those have to deal with the actual hashing itself, when you actually run the miners and try to solve the block. So, we have the blockchain header fields, and we go through our equation down here. You concatenate them together, and you run a hash of it. SHA-256, you run it twice against the header itself. And that gives you the hash of the block itself. Now, the difficulty target, I'll go over, but the nonce is basically a random number that you throw in there. Because if you hash a block once with all the details in it, you have to change something about it. Otherwise, you'll get the same hash over and over and over and over. So let's see here. We have every 2 weeks, the difficulty is changed to show, we want to have 10 minutes per block based on the last 2 weeks. So here it is. Retargeting is set to make it on the past 2016 blocks, which is roughly 2 weeks. Let's go back to our nonce here. So the block hash has to be under a certain amount for other miners and network to accept. Let's say we want the hash, 256-bit hash. It has to be underneath this right here, otherwise it's no good. A lot of leading zeros there, a lot of trailing zeros. Now mind you, this is hexadecimal, so each time you move to the right, that's an exponential change in difficulty, which the hashing on the network has gone up exponentially over the years. So let's see, we add our nonce, just a random number to the end of it, and it's not under the difficulty. Well, you just generate a new nonce. You just keep doing this over and over again. You concatenate it, you hash it again, and you repeat until the difficulty target is met. Everything you've heard about hashing, you could write it in Visual Basic if you wanted, or what's a language no one likes? You can write it in that. You really can. You keep doing that, you generate it, until you have something underneath the difficulty target. Now, mining has gone from graphics cards to specific circuits for, ASICs for Bitcoin mining. And Bitcoin uses SHA-256, but there are a lot of other coins out there that use everything the same as Bitcoin, except for maybe they have a different block time, they have different amounts. But the biggest difference between a lot of coins is they use different hashing algorithms. There's SHA-256 twice. Some of it do it just one time. Some of it use scrypt. If you know about Linux and passwords, they have that. Whirlpool, SHA-3. There's even one coin that uses, instead of taking a hash of SHA-256, you first take a 256, and you take a hash, a script hash of that, and then a Whirlpool hash of that, and the SHA-3 hash of that. So a long chain of hashes. That way, no one can create an integrated circuit for it. Now, if that ever becomes ineffective, consensus can change that as long as everyone agrees on it. And some coins have switched their algorithms. So you run through it, you go underneath the difficulty target until the target is met. And then you send it out to the network. So here we are. Good old block P. It's out there, it's verified, everyone agrees on it, chain's extended, we just keep going. But that doesn't always happen as smoothly as it does. Sometimes two people at the exact same time, roughly, because it's an average of 10 minutes, will generate the same block, or a candidate block that extends the chain. So let's say that happens. Honest mistake, it happens plenty of times. The red network finds something that extends the blockchain, and the green network does too. And because of network latency, it takes a little bit for them to go out. Their blocks are about a megabyte, so it's fast, but it's not instantaneous. So it propagates out, and what you'll have is two halves of the network competing for the same block, mining it. As they'll generate a new block that's based on that one, and it'll propagate throughout the network. So you'll have half doing one, half doing the other. So we have block A and block B. Half of the network is hashing each one of those because it was sent to them first. So what happens next? They're hashing, and someone finds a new block that extends the blockchain. But which one? Extends the green over there is extended by the magenta, and it propagates out to the network, and everyone gets a hold of it, and then they look at it. After they look at it, they say, well, either it extends our chain that we're working on, it'll extend some other chain, and they'll probably resync with that network, and things just kind of go on as they are. And that's not really a problem in most cases, because the whole network's talking to the whole network, and consensus is what it's all built on. So let's talk about what happens when that does happen. It's in the interest of every honest miner to take the longest blockchain, because if not, they're going to have to come from behind, which I'll talk about that in a second, or all the transactions that they were in an orphan block, but were probably transmitted to the longer chain anyway. And if after 3 or 4 blocks have been transmitted, all the ones that were invalidated by them getting rid of that block have already propagated to the network, and everything's just fine. Now, since transactions are signed and sent to anyone, so if you put on Wikipedia, if you edited a page and threw some random gobbledygook in there, someone knew what to do with it, they could pull it down and decrypt it. And you can think of it like that with transactions. So if someone has a transaction broadcast, as long as someone holds on to it, the hash of that transaction contains the signing over of it. So as long as it's out there somewhere, someone will add it into a block. And any good wallet software or servicer of it will make sure your transaction gets in there at some point. It may not happen the next block, but within 2 or 3, there are some equations to make sure that older transactions, once they're transmitted, find their way into the blockchain. So, rejecting the longest chain invalidates any possible gains from mining. We'll say if you have a different chain that's 3 or 4 blocks ahead and you're a miner, you just want to choose it, or does it, because I'm sure everyone's heard when they've read about Bitcoin that there can be an attack on the network, the dreaded 51% attack. Now, if you have a dishonest chain, an attacker, or just an honest, someone who has a shorter chain, we can look at the math behind this. So let's say we have the probability that an honest node finds the next block, and the probability the attacker finds the next block. Now that is quite literally a split between how much hashing power one side has and one the other one has. So let's say it's around 45-55. So let's see here. The probability attacker will ever catch up. If the attacking chain has more, there's a chance that after however many blocks, at some point in the future, they will catch up. They could rehash the entire chain if they wanted to and catch up. It will take a long time, but they will catch up eventually. But let's say we have an attacking chain that has less than half of the attack power. Well, each block has a probability of being solved, Q over P. And if it's 45-50, that's close to 1. So if you're only 1 block behind, there's a chance you could catch up. But each time you go back, you have to multiply that by itself. So if your chance of actually getting the block out of that equation is 90%, well, 2 blocks back, that's 0.9 times 0.9, 3 back, and it keeps going and going and going. And if you're far enough back, your chance of actually catching up are next to none. Unless that's the whole point, unless you really do want to go and you've decided that that's what you're trying to do in life. We have a fork that isn't just a 1 or 2 chains. Some wants to go back about 10 blocks and try and rehash some blocks to invalidate the transactions of blocks 2 through 9 on the top chain. So they have to start at a point they want, and they start hashing a block that is a candidate block that points back to that one. Well, something interesting happens. If they are both 50-50, which is close enough to 51 for our purposes, and they both generate the block. Now, since they have half the hashing power of each side, the difficulty didn't change. So it takes 20 minutes for each block. And then 20 minutes later, there they are. And it just keeps going and going. So unless you have enough hashing power to not only extend the block to there before they do, and you're a miner who has 50% of the network, and you want to say, I don't care about the top blocks. If you have 50% of the network, those top blocks there's probably a lot of your money in there from just the mining. So the chance that someone would actually do this in an attempt to be greedy and pull, resources to them, there's a lot of game theory in there that suggests they would not want to do that. Because if you're a miner who has 50% of the network or a significant amount, you're getting so many blocks, you're getting the rewards. Someone would only want to do this if they're actually trying to attack the network, like a legitimate attack to break it down and not to steal or reverse transactions. So anyone who would do that, they have IP addresses, they have names, they have addresses, they have identifiers that says anything sent from them, I don't want it. And the pace of the internet is if something happens, everyone knows about it in 2 or 3 minutes. At least if you're watching closely and see this happening, there's a lot of alerts in place. So if you were to see this happening, there's a lot of automated steps within mining software that says, I'm just not going to talk to those people. We're not going to do it. The forums will blow up, Twitter will blow up, all hands on deck to make sure this doesn't happen. So, I want to go back to this right here. Rejecting the longest chain invalidates any possible gains from mining. Or does it? Well, yes it does. But if your point is not to take the money and run, or to be greedy on the network, if your point is actually attack it, well, yes. If your point is to invalidate the blocks, that's a beautiful way to do it. If you hate Bitcoin that much, and you want to drop, $150 million on the software and hardware and all the things that go into it in the data centers to break down the network, well, what they can just do is the next couple blocks, they can just switch to a different algorithm and all your dreams just got destroyed. So Bitcoin is very robust, not because of the underlying software and cryptography as much as it is also with the people who use it. So honest miners who want to make sure this system goes into perpetuity, that transactions are sent, everything's done, and valid and honest and good enough intention, the blockchain will just keep going and going. It doesn't need anybody or anything to keep going. So, this is what we're talking about here. We're talking about Bitcoin. It's a decentralized cryptocurrency built on the blockchain. And the blockchain is a decentralized database used to securely and immutably send information. In the case of Bitcoin, that is financial value. I always get asked, what is the value of Bitcoin? Well, what's the value of any other dollars, gold, silver, stocks? Who here does not have a bank account? Like, at all? No checking, no savings, nothing. Right. Who here does? I want all the hands up. So, the fact that you could just put your money into a bank and they are bound by law to treat it nicely and you equitably is not something nice about the banking system now. I'd say that contributes a lot to the value of the dollar. Let's say you're in a place that, we can complain about 2-3% inflation. I know I do. What about a place where it's 10 to 15? Is cash all of a sudden great there? Not so much. So it's what's behind a currency. The network, once you do something, it cannot be invalidated. It can't be charged back. Unless someone actually goes into your house and breaks down and steals your computer, online fraud is really at a certain rate due to negligence or people not having good security practices. Same thing with Bitcoin. You have bad passwords, bad hashes. Insecure hashes are what become stolen Bitcoin. People like to think of it as a get-rich-quick scheme sometimes. Now, if you're a day trader and you went into day trading Bitcoin, I'd say you probably do pretty well. But if you're not a day trader, you're not going to become a day trader in Bitcoin. If you bought some a while back in the day when it was at however much, and then you sold it off, and you didn't stay in the system, well, that's kind of your fault. There's one transaction out there, the most infamous transaction there is. It's called the Bitcoin pizza transaction. Someone spent 10,000 Bitcoins on 2 pizzas. Now, price at 700 today, it was at 1,000 about a year and a half ago, or maybe about 2 years ago. Was that guy unintelligent or not wise to spend 10,000 Bitcoins on a pizza? Well, no, because he sent them out there when Bitcoin had no value. So he sent nothing to somebody, and he didn't stop mining, and I think that guy is probably, I've looked at the address associated with it, and he's got plenty sitting back right now. So, I hope you've all at least understand the reason why it works. There's a lot of nice, well thought out cryptographic things in Bitcoin that we all trust in our daily lives, since we're mostly security people, or at least computing people. There's a lot of nice networking things. I hope we all trust enough because we're all computing people and networking people. And there's a lot of risk right now, maybe, if you want to invest. But in terms of buying some and sending it to somebody, the transaction fees are almost negligible. If you have a small business that, let's say you go to 7-Eleven, most things are $1 anyway. The reason why they're $1 is because they factor in your credit card purchase into it. So you think of pricing in terms of economics. Well, transaction fees are very low and anyone can use it. You might see, if more people adopted Bitcoin, a lot less money sent to Visa, MasterCard, Discover, and a lot more just savings being passed on to people. I'm sure there's a lot of questions about Bitcoin that, depending on the conference you go to, you'll have. But I'd like to go ahead and open it up to questions. And if there is any, there are a few more things I can talk about that I've had good questions about. I'll share with you. Any questions about Bitcoin, the network, people who use it, its value? Why I decided to present here and not somewhere else? Okay, well, who here has a cell phone? Who here had a landline at some point growing up? Rotary dial? By choice or because it's all there was? Okay, all right. Who had to call the operator every time? Okay, nobody's that far. In some parts of the world, some of the third world, in South America, they never really had landlines the same way all of us did. They never had the rotary dial, and they definitely never had operators in every place. Yes, there's a lot of different countries there, but the adoption of cell phones is very high. Just as high as anywhere else. But because the technology of the older things was not so available, planned out, built into the infrastructure, they don't have the. I don't imagine DSL is a big option. Some places never had landlines, but cell phones are. And who knows what a SIM card is? Okay, who knows what function it provides? It's a certificate. It's a smart card. It looks like anything else. So let's say you were in some place that doesn't really have the internet, but has cell phone towers. Places you hear about where cell phone minutes are traded around like currency. Let's say instead of having Bitcoin on the internet. You could have Bitcoin attached to a phone that has a SIM card or some other kind of certificate-based cryptographic hardware. That could be a way to bring banking to people who don't have it. Now, some places have inflation, crazy inflation. It's not so crazy. So is Bitcoin really made for people like us who have cell phones and bank accounts and all the sort of financial tools to, well, get through what we need to accumulate capital, to finance things? People in other places, not so much. So that is one application I think Bitcoin could fill, is places that where there's at least cell phones and a copy and paste. The rest just works itself out in terms of being able to transmit Bitcoin. Places that don't have cell phones, well, that's becoming less and less each day, each month or year probably. Places that don't have actual bank accounts, much larger. So what will we see in some of these places? We'll see places that do not have brick and mortar banks, maybe have online banking, but could possibly, because of cell phone infrastructure and other technology, definitely have a financial system that is digital, secure, and out of the hands of less than savory government officials. So there's one thing I think is real great about Bitcoin in that regard. Now, when it comes to using Bitcoin online, you can get it a lot of ways. You can link up your bank account. You can find a dealer on the street. There's sites for that, local Bitcoins and other places. And you can get it. And you can buy just about anything with it at a certain rate through enough hoops. Like you can buy, vendors like Newegg will let you buy things from it. I know Overstock was big into it. I think Microsoft lets you buy Xbox Live Time or digital games with it. But then there's the next tier of people, a lot of places take gift cards. You can buy a gift card for a place with Bitcoin, and they will give you a little discount because they don't have to eat the transaction fees for credit cards. Get a little discount, and you can go buy anything. Walmart was finally added to gift, so you can buy anything now with Bitcoin because you can shop at Walmart with it. You can actually get Sheetz gift cards with it, which is nice for this area because all the other places weren't around here. And one thing you can do, and this is something I guess I'll extend to whoever's here, people in other countries who have good, solid, honest, charitable efforts, but they may not be exactly, simple to send them an ACH transaction or a wire or a check. But they're doing good things, like if they're in some place in Africa or Asia or South America, and they're doing well because you've kept up with them, and you want to give them some money to do work, but you don't want to deal with the transaction fees of international wire transfers and clearing houses, and maybe they're in some country that their currency isn't exactly that great. Well, I'd say a lot of charitable efforts in the U.S. and abroad could benefit from having something as seamless and easy to use as Bitcoin or another cryptocurrency that might be more suited to their needs. So I guess with that, if there's anybody here, I saw the Hackers for Charity out there, the 3 or 4 Geeks, if they are interested in getting Bitcoins as payments or things, come see me afterwards. I'll see what I can do to get you in there. If there are any businesses here who sell things that are on the smaller end, hosting, cloud, time, small services or items, I can get you a star on that also. I'll charge the friends and family discount, which is free. I just asked you to use my affiliate links, which actually, because of the nature of Bitcoin, everyone wants to get everybody into it. Most affiliate links both give the person who gets roped in and the roper a discount. Not discount, but a little thing back. So if you get signed up on Coinbase and buy $100 worth of Bitcoin, I get $10, and you get $10 also. So if you're going to get into Bitcoin, try to find somebody who's already got something so you can both benefit from it. I guess there's one more thing for the holidays. There's a website called Gift that sells gift cards, but there's also another website called Purse. Who here has anything on their Amazon wish list? Somebody, anybody? Well, you create an Amazon wish list. You make it public. You send it to sort of the marketplace on Purse, and then someone buys those things for you with Bitcoin, which is nice. It's a way for them to buy Bitcoin through a trusted, Amazon's trustworthy, either with the gift cards or their credit card, a very trustworthy source Amazon is. but you can specify a discount. I got this phone, Moto G3 was $200. I got it for about $150 because I just had some Bitcoin sitting around and someone wanted it more than I did, and I got the phone off my wish list. If they don't know my name because they just saw my wish list, then it gets sent to me, and it works out just fine. So the applications of Bitcoin are financial is a good start, but there's one that gets mentioned a couple times where, let's say you had a very important document, a contract, and let's go all the way back to let's say instead of having a contract, not a contract, but just a random string for our private key, you took instead the hash of a contract, and you made it your private key, and then you just transacted with it on the network. And let's say later on you wanted to prove the authenticity of that document, that it was signed at that time, it exists, it's legitimate. Produce the hash of it and say, hey, on the blockchain there is an address whose private key is the hash of this contract. That hash is not reproducible. No one else is going to generate that. So is that not a way to use the blockchain for other things? How much does a notary cost? $5 in this state is the most they can charge. How many transactions can you put in a block? It gets pretty high, but let's say you can only put 50 in there. That makes the block itself, not even the currency involved, just the block itself, worth $250 because it can sign and verify 250 documents as a notary. Now let's say instead of having a currency platform that you dump your stuff into so someone else has to hold on to it, let's say there's a blockchain based around being a notary or a legal arbiter or something that needs to be held on to and immutable and unchangeable. The blockchain could be part of that. I know IBM at a conference, I know they had probably the coolest thing I've seen in terms of having a blockchain for an application. It was just a demo. They had 2 screens, or maybe a couple more than 2 screens. They had, they worked with, I think it was either Nike or it was Samsung. Had 2 Samsung ads rolling on the TVs. And what happened was, they put so much money into an address, they signed it with a certain key, and of course this was a different platform, but same concept. They did enough things on the blockchain, and then after about 5 minutes, the ad on the second TV changed. Because what they had on the blockchain was a bidding war for ad space on a TV. Now this is just proof of concept. What if you had a lot of smart billboards? They're coming up there. I see them all up down 64 and 60 these days. What if you had a smart billboard that just read the blockchain? Read. And once a transaction goes through, in that transaction it says, go here, get this file, make sure it has this hash, put it on this screen. All you have to do is make sure someone's run only 30 seconds, doesn't have adult content or what have you in it. You can have a completely automated advertising system. Who has ever been to Las Vegas? No DEF CON people? So in Las Vegas, a lot of billboards. I could see that being an application. So I guess now that I've teased out all the cool stuff, are there any more questions, any comments, any concerns, any remarks?
Do you have any experience with mining?
Yes, I do. Well, I got into it after it came down from 1,000, but before it recovered. So a very bad time for anyone who isn't big into it. Some places stopped mining because the electricity costs could not cover the possible reward. I had it in my basement, not my mom's, my basement. I had it on a Raspberry Pi. In fact, let me see if I can pull up a picture here of something that about looked like. And I did have it running on, let's see here. Let's close this out here. Right here.
Oh, okay. You got the little USB ones.
Yes, yep. These USB sticks here have an application-specific integrated circuit, an ASIC, And what it does one thing very well. SHA-256, not even twice. It just, SHA-256, send it back, do it again. Does it work? No, try the next one. So, people actually, when those came out, those were just all the rage. And then 6 months later, they were,
I bought one too, so.
yeah. And you can actually, the turnaround time for hardware there for a while was 3 months, theoretically. No one ever had that much turnaround time, but if you based on how the network was working, most hardware was priced to turn around in 3 months and make your money back on it. And I did on mine. Now, most of that was coming back from selling it, but I did, and I would never get back into mining because I don't have a data center at my disposal. No, the one at work won't let me do it there. It's a federal data center. They get you for that. But yes, I've done mining. Most people who do graphics cards mining, there's a lot of that still going on in different coins that don't use SHA-256. There's even a couple coins that require so much memory to do a hash that they do not use graphics cards. They have to use an actual standard CPU because no graphics card has the right amount of memory or the right registers or something for it. So there's a lot of innovation in that space, and I'll leave you with this. There's even some coins out there that verify storage. You can have cloud-based decentralized storage on the blockchain that you just pay for. And there's even a coin that's trying really hard to have a mining algorithm that deals with RAM and its speed. I imagine they're not going to want to buy a mainframe because that's where that would take off. But any innovation that could, if you can dream it up and you can code it, you can do it. Because there's at least some financial incentive to get you started. Now, there's been a lot of scams in the crypto world. We'll just bring this one out over here. Nobody else can laugh at that? Come on now. For anyone who doesn't know, sudo, you can do anything you want with sudo. RM, that's remove. R, that's recursive. That's starting from the very root of your file system. The base of your C drive, the base of your root. Recursively remove and force it. Just do it. I don't care what's there. I don't care if the computer shuts down while I'm doing it, because it will. Just do it. So yes, there's been a lot of scams, but it's mostly stuff like this. It really is. So if you were a naysayer about Bitcoin because of volatility, you're right. You really are. You don't want to invest in it unless you know what you're doing. But if you're a naysayer because you don't trust cryptography or networking, find a different industry. But if you just want to be a casual user who just wants a little discount here and there, just go get some and just use it. I'll ask one more time. Are there any more questions? Well, I would like to thank Secure West Virginia for having me, the 304 Geeks for putting this on. Anyone who wants to get Bitcoin integrated into their business, if you came to this event, I'll get you stored in there for free. Although I'd probably get you stored in there for free anyway, because actually it's very, very easy to do. I don't actually do anything. I just send you to a website, and you do the rest. But yes, thank you for attending me, and thank you for listening. I tried to make it interesting.
No preserve root. Not built without it.
What?
Write a command on a computer. No preserve root.
Well, on a virtual machine once I did that on Linux. I had to do it a certain way, but
I did that on their computer. So I said she wanted to throw out Slackware and install Kali. I said, okay, let me try that RM-RF/. Yeah, what I didn't realize was her Windows partition was mounted with a folder.
oh, it's mounted, yeah.
Windows too, so we had to reinstall it. It took for 7 minutes deleting folders. I tried by alt. It said alt not command not found.
You Control-C, that's not in the register. That doesn't mean anything.
TWD, not found. LS, not found. Took out a bunch of stuff.
Open up a second